Hey Randy, episode 8.
Yeah, I mean, today I guess if nothing else, we haven't bored ourselves. So,
I agree. Have the advertisers been ringing your phone? They haven't hit me up yet, so maybe it takes more than eight.
no, yeah, no
Okay,
contract offerings out there for mentioning products yet, but
okay, we'll keep
we'll give
waiting.
it. That's
Maybe
right.
this is the one. Maybe we'll get more of it. Yeah, we're having fun. I think some other people are having fun. I'm excited about this one. I think we had some good interest in some of our solving the world's problems. I think the college. I don't think everybody loves college football as much as we do, but some did.
Right.
I think this topic tonight, though, is gonna it hits everybody.
Right.
Education. We've teased this for a little while, so we're gonna go on the education side of the student athlete for a little while. This one may become a like a good sermon series. So at our church, I think we've been in Acts. I think Ross said for 18 months. We're about to
Wow.
finish it up. So he just preaches through a Bible. So we may do the next 18 episodes on education. So
That's
there's
right.
this is going to be the high level overview tonight. So I'll kick it off. I love the title we've got. I would suggest that we spell Rithmatic with an R as well. Then we can get alliteration. So to show yours,
Those three
my
R's right
good Alabama education, your Texas education, and then your time in Nebraska, we'll kick it off with a proper title. Readin, writing, and Rithmatic for alliteration. All three spelled with R's because education has done us very well, obviously.
there.
Um, so reading, writing, and arithmetic has education failed us in the United States, and I know there's 1,000 different opinions, and I did do a little bit of research on this. Similar to you, I didn't spend a lot of time. My mom taught high school advanced math for 36 years. I think we counted it up at one point. It was several thousand students she taught. There's not many people in North Alabama that she hasn't had some connection to, which is pretty cool. And then my wife taught for 5 years. So I've had a ringside seat. I'm the benefactor of a really good education from a very small public high school and then University of Alabama Huntsville. So I've participated in it. And then from the industry side, I've got some opinions on that. So I did do a little bit of research just because I can, you listen to a lot of things and you hear a lot of things over time. And education it becomes like everything else. It's a little bit of a political topic. And that gets mixed in there. So I was looking at some different scenarios and some different statistics. One of them I thought was interesting. I'll hit off the top that I've heard a lot, and then I did some it's probably the most research I did was on the topic of has the United States fallen behind. I think that's an interesting, but it's a hot potato that gets passed around depending on what you're looking at. And you can make statistics do anything you want them to do. So sure, you can show statistics that show we've fallen way behind in math, and maybe we have. But the world has also caught up. And so when you look at it, statistically, yes, we have reading, we're doing pretty well. And writing, we're doing pretty well. The arithmetic with an R, we have either fallen behind or everybody else has caught up and passed us. And, I guess if you're not moving forward, you are falling back. And so really, that's kind of the crux of what we're going to talk about is where are we with education? Is it over the last, 50 years or so, has it gotten better? Is it worse? And then start hitting some of the whys. If it is worse, why? I think yours and my theory both is that it's definitely not better. And again, if we're just maintaining status quo, we probably have fallen behind some of our peer nations. And obviously education plays a vital role in geopolitics. Education is a powerful thing. I believe I read something, I heard an interview one time with Ben Carson before he got into politics, which was probably the better version because people he wasn't as divisive then. But his mom, single mom, he and his brother, they grew up in the inner city. She made them read books and write book reports, and she would grade the book reports. She could not read. She would just make marks on there to make them think. They didn't know for years that she couldn't read. But him talking about him, he ultimately became, for anybody that doesn't know who he is, before politics, one of the most famous neurosurgeons, especially with what he did with pediatric neurosurgery. He separated conjoined twins at the head, unbelievable. And he talked about books gave him hope. because he was able to take himself anywhere in the world when he was a kid and was hungry and, didn't have anything. He was able to do things. So, I've looked at it a lot. The power of a good education can change. I think it's intriguing that why are people who are enslaved a lot of times not allowed to read books or have education? Well, because then you can get out of that. That education helps you understand. So education is a powerful tool. It can be used for good. It can be used for bad. So we're on this episode, we're just going to step through. We've got some questions that you and I are going to walk through and talk through. And again, these questions, they may end up creating 5 or 6 more podcasts. But I'm excited about it. It is an important topic. My oldest one is a senior in high school, about to go to Auburn to be a vet. And my younger one is a freshman in high school. So unfortunately, I don't have a lot of runway left to affect either one of theirs. But they've been a good product of public education, and things are going well for them. But I'm still passionate about it. I've said a lot of times, Huntsville's a special place. And education plays a vital role in that. That's some of what we'll hit is whose role is it to kind of steward education. So let's just, do you want to say anything to kick us off, or do you want to dive right in?
Well, just, if we want to talk a little bit about our bona fides on this particular topic, you come from a family of educators, married an educator, as did I. I was a college professor for 16 years, ran an organization that provided space for college programs to reach adult learners in our community, and was a campus director of a remote campus of one of the colleges, one of the universities in Nebraska. So I had that side of it. Also was served on public school board, and also did some work as a media technologist within the school system at the elementary level. But I think the most important thing is that you and I both have children whom we have watched matriculate their way through the school systems. My daughter also is a product of public education and a pretty good public school system. I wish that I could say that with all of our experience, watching and dealing with this. I have a sister who was a 40-year teacher and administrator in public schools, but I don't have any answers. If anything, I have more questions about where we stand. But no, I think the ultimate question is, have we failed or have we not? What's the definition of success and failure?
Yeah. I had the same thought. I mean, it's the same thing we talked about of, what college football conference is better? Well, what's success?
Right.
What is that? So,
right.
And I think, I've got a lot of questions. I do have some answers. Mom and I've talked a lot about it, and Mom was very controversial is not the right word. Everybody loved her. She gave the administration fits, though, all the administrative level, because what she saw was teaching. Her passion was teaching. She was never part of any of the teachers' unions. She said, if I'm good at my job, I don't need that. She caught a lot of grief for that over a number of years, and she taught at different schools in Huntsville. She ultimately taught the longest in New Hope and retired from New Hope. But she was really good. I mean, she taught kids that went on to be doctors, lawyers, any profession you can think of, she did it. And I don't know of a single kid, even ones who didn't make great grades in her class, that wouldn't tell you that she was really good, and they earned she never gave anybody a point. She joked that if you made a 64.4, you earned every bit of it. And she never gave anybody a D. You earned all of it. So, but she and I talked a lot about it. And I think foundationally, the focus is a big part of the problem. She was a teacher. She didn't have an education degree. She had a math degree. And could have done a lot of things with the math degree, but chose, especially when she was coming out of college, but chose to teach because she loved the kids. And she walked away from it for a little while and went back. And again, it was the passion for the kids is why she did it. And I think that became unique. She got a lot of pressure in math for kids to use calculators. And then, the focus became a lot about the the perceived results of tests, standardized testing, what were those, which was ultimately driving funding and money. So I think
Right.
at the foundation of a lot of have we failed, I think you and I both, and I know for sure my mom would say the focus of what education about has changed. And we can
Yes.
talk about that, and I think we absolutely will. And I think at a very high level, I think it's really easy to fix. You got to focus back on the education of the students at every level, from kindergarten through any postgraduate. Education should be about education. Then we can talk about why education. And you and I have talked about this. And sure, you can have academia for the sake of academia, but what are you really going to school for? What's the?
Yeah.
And I think that needs to be redefined, and we'll talk about
Oh,
that.
I agree.
Yeah, and I think other countries have redefined what that is, and I think we haven't necessarily done that well. So let's hit the first question here. I mean, we kind of are hitting around it, but are we failing our children and our nation when it comes to education? So what do you think?
It's a tough question to answer because once again, what is our purpose? What is the end game in terms of education? But first of all, I'm going to say yes. I think that the approach that we're taking, the goals that we have established, the reliance on federal funding that is driving a lot of things away from the teachers and into the hands of administrators and school boards and state education commissions and this sort of thing is damaging, or it certainly is reducing the amount of time that we give our educators to actually do a good job in terms of teaching. And I have some of my own thoughts about, what should we be focusing on in the elementary age group in terms of education? Does that change when we start talking about middle school and high school? How about college? Is college necessary
The trade
anymore?
schools is something my dad and I used to talk about a lot. I mean, the trade schools, and it started a while back, but the Obama administration really pushed that it became a perception that if you weren't going to college, you might be a failure. And I know a lot of people during that time frame that it became a stigma. And the trade schools, they were already waning, but that put a death blow to a lot of the trade schools. And
Right.
now,
Well, and yeah.
why are trades so needed? Well, because nobody went into the trades for a long time.
Well, and I'll tell you another thing that pushed us down that particular path is the increase and the ease in acquiring student loans, which of course have their own terrible
Yeah,
backstory and ending for a lot of these kids that have gotten the degrees. But because we push the fact that you can't get a job, I mean, we reached a point where I was hearing as a college professor that you couldn't get a day shift job at McDonald's
yeah,
as a assistant manager if you didn't have a bachelor's,
yeah.
and
Why do
probably
you
couldn't
think
get
that
a.
is? What do you think's behind that message?
Oh,
I have a thought.
I'm gonna get in a lot of trouble probably with. First of all, understand that I thoroughly enjoyed my time as a college professor, and I have a great deal of respect for what colleges do, at least in turn, ostensibly anyway.
One thing, and I
But
want to say that too, Randy. I mean, obviously, I love my mom, I love my wife. One thing I want to, it's kind of my disclaimer. I always seem to have a fine print disclaimer up front that this isn't so much about teachers. And yeah,
right,
there's some bad teachers. For some reason, I saw a comedian today. It seems like teachers are using schools as their dating app because they keep getting them arrested for messing around with kids. So that's bad. Take them aside. Take some teachers who are incompetent out of the mix. I believe, just like cops, just like preachers, that most of them are really good and trying really hard. I
mhm,
don't put a lot of this onus on, college professors gets a little different, but kindergarten, junior high and high school, I think those teachers are there because they enjoy teaching kids and they're trying. You get into college, and I think that's a mixed bag. I think that's absolutely the case, and I think there are some that are academia for academia, and I think there's a different agenda. But I don't think it's the majority. It's not been my
yeah.
experience.
Well, and I'll tell you that the college professors that I had the privilege of working around, for the most part, were excellent. You
Yeah,
did have some that were academics for academics' sake,
sure.
and that's not necessarily a bad thing.
No.
That can offer a perspective to
Yes.
students. There are those who had their own socio-political agenda, that they chose to push. There, I
Yes.
have a little bit of a problem. But you ask where the problem originates. It is this. This is an oversimplification. Federal funding at all
So,
levels.
and why do you think that federal funding started becoming so prevalent? I'm leading you down a path. I have an answer I want to get to, but I'm curious your thoughts first.
I'm not knowing all of the history of the Department of Education, and a lot of this started with the interjection through the educational process of civil rights monitoring,
Mm-hmm.
whether it was gender based or race based. And don't get me wrong, there should be absolutely no hint of racism in any of the decisions that are
Yep.
made
Agree.
uh, uh, in our lives, period, in this country. But I'm not sure where, the Department of Education, uh, their greatest power, their leverage is funding. And their power, up until recently anyway, has been, or their focus, I'm sorry, it has been Title IX
Social engineering.
issues, social
Yeah,
engineering
what
that,
the Department of Education, and you can go look. I mean, the line is pretty distinct, and I've heard a number of people say that the Department of fill in the blank usually means they're not focused on the thing that it ends with.
right.
And I think the Department of Education is no exception. But there's a pretty distinct line when the Department of Education came into existence. Things didn't get better, and you
Yeah.
start pumping all this money in federal funding, and it wasn't because they're focused a lot on education. A lot of the social engineering started with that.
Yeah, and it's not just the Department of Education's funding, although obviously a big part of that is student loans,
Yes.
which maybe should be reduced by 70%. I don't know, but a lot of
The
the
only loan that you
research,
can't file bankruptcy from. And again,
yeah,
you start asking a lot of these questions. And again, I'm going to give you a conspiracy. I'll put on my tinfoil hat in a minute and give you a very cynical conspiracy theory. But I think maybe all of it's not the case. But I think some of it has to be.
well, I'll tell you that the various and sundry educators, especially at the level of higher education that I have worked with and that I know personally, who rely on research funding almost to a person, at least if they're doing research that has any inherent value for mankind, they would much rather have research that is funded by corporate America.
Yes.
And I'd never heard one say anything good about the restrictions and the oversight required for that federal funding that came from the Department of Education. And let's face it, those are bureaucrats for the most part. They are not educators. I'm sorry.
Right.
And I know that'll offend a lot of people maybe that work for the Department of Education. We'll get to that later because I don't think it should exist. But
Yeah.
that having been said, these people know that they can influence the direction of education in any particular classroom, any particular university or college, any educational institution, by the threat of withholding funds.
Yep.
That very much like the cocaine dealer, your first one's free,
Yep.
Until you find yourself so dependent upon it. I will tell you that the ease with which and the amount of student loans that students have been able to get over the last couple of decades has been one of the big driving forces behind the expansion
Yeah.
of colleges and universities, new buildings, new programs, new faculty, and
You're building
being
on
on
the,
that
you're
end of
building
it,
that
I
on the
was
you're
I
building
was
that on the
there,
back of students who have got these loans. That, by the way,
and
this is crazy. I mean, if you end up down this pathway, you took a wrong turn, but they're garnishing people's Social Security
yeah,
to pay student loans.
right,
And that's
right,
and again, yeah, you don't go, I would challenge anybody, go on any college campus at any level right now and look at the amount of building. It's
yeah,
unbelievable.
right, right,
And some of these schools have got, look at the endowments some of them have. So you got
right,
billion-dollar endowments, and meanwhile you got students taking loans that they're
right,
paying on until they're 40 or
right,
60 or whatever,
right.
and they're building new buildings. None of it, I don't think it's sustainable. We'll get into that later, but again, let me throw out a little bit of my conspiracy theory, and I think
Okay.
it underpins a lot of what we're saying, and I think it's I think it started with higher, postgraduate university. And then I think it has gone into every level, all the way to elementary school, high school, junior high. You're seeing it. You're familiar with Yuri Bezmenov, right?
Yep.
The Whether he was KGB or not is often debated, but he was definitely affiliated with Russian intelligence. And he laid out the plan. And I'm a
Yeah.
big fan of, if we can deny something exists all we want to. But my theory of, if I walk in the parking lot and two guys say, "Hey, I'm going to whip your ass," you should listen to them.
Yeah.
And so when you have a guy like Yuri Bezmenov saying, "Here's how you do this," and then you have a guy like Karl Marx saying, "Here's how you do this," and you have all these people that put it out, and then it starts looking a lot like that. Again, maybe it's not the full plan, and maybe there's not one person, but it sure feels, if it walks like a duck and quacks like a duck and looks like a duck, you might ask, is it a duck?
Chance. Yeah.
So for anybody not familiar with Yuri Bezmenov, he is a former Russian KGB associate. Propaganda is something, but he was definitely Russian intelligence. But very simplistically, he laid out the best way to change a country is, and it doesn't take long. You get one generation of kids and you follow them through the educational process, and when they come out the other end, you've changed a nation. And again, he was involved in propaganda, and way before TikTok and social media, we've done it too. So it's not a unique Russian and Chinese thing. But Russians would come here. I mean, there was graffiti, there were protesters, they funded things, and this goes way back. Even during, you mentioned all the, the racial riots. I mean, a lot of that was going on because they wanted unrest. They still want that today. And so, and the problem is they're flaming both sides of it. They're not trying to help anything. They just want unrest. But when you look at, his plan of going in and really starting to create education, not for the sake of education, but his argument was, make it indoctrination,
Mm-hmm. Right.
because students are captive, they spend more time in education than they do with their parents. So if you can start separating kids from their parents, and you see that happening a lot, where kids aren't supposed to go tell their parents whatever. I mean, a lot of that was going on during the transgender thing. It was a big deal where they're trying to take kids away from parents, and parents weren't supposed to be told some of this stuff. It was asinine what the schools were doing, and the right they thought they had to start taking over for the parents. But Bezmenov clearly said, if you want to change a nation, use the educational system, not for education, but indoctrination. So again, when you start looking at some of the things we've talked about, and I think it's most evident in universities, but you can go find traces of it talking to mom and other educators. You can, and just watch it. I mean, I watch what's happened with my girls throughout the process, and Allie, same thing. I mean, you can watch kind of what happens. And this isn't unique to Harvard, Yale. It's not it happens at the University of Georgia, the University of Alabama, Auburn University. It's across the board. It may be more predominant at some schools versus the other ones. But there is a lot of indoctrination that goes on. And you and I have talked about this. And I think it's sad. I think one of the biggest roles education plays is learning. Clearly, this stuff is important, especially if you're going to be a brain surgeon or a lawyer, an engineer. But I think even more important than that is learning who you are and growing, and that's at every level. Elementary school, middle school, high school. I believe, from elementary all the way through high school, probably the most important thing I learned is how to deal with other people. And yeah, sure, and some of my high school classes helped me get to college, but, and you and I've talked about this, and this is where I differ from kind of my dad, and I'm more classical liberal. I believe universities should be where you go off and you're allowed to explore all kinds of crazy ideas. Test who you are, what you think.
Mm-hmm.
The problem is it's gone from being free to think about everything and explore everything to you're free to think like you're supposed to think. And if you get outside that, you're no longer being a liberal free thinker. So again, is that the whole reason education is different than what it was? No, but it feels like there are a lot of people trying to use education as an indoctrination program, not education. So I threw that out there. Curious your kind of thoughts on it, but I think that, my opinion, that's an underpinning of a lot of the problem. And if you got that out and focus back on education rather than indoctrination, we could probably get somewhere.
Well, let me throw something out there that might scare you a little bit, given the fact that I've seen the process and been involved in the process from elementary age school children all the way to graduate students. I believe there is a lot more indoctrination occurring at the elementary, middle school, and high school levels than
Oh, I
is
think there are
happening.
now. No, I agree. I think it
The
started. It's flown down though.
the At the university level, my experience and the experience of most of my cohorts who are in that profession has been, while there is a definite sort of a social leaning that one can tie to most universities and colleges out
Yeah.
there is not a great deal of pressure coming down from the college presidents and provosts and this sort of thing. You still see quite a diversity of social opinion and that sort of thing. And even though I hate the concept of tenure, but one of the good things is that tenured professors don't have to worry about losing their jobs because they have taken an extremely conservative bent in their course, in the classrooms where they are presenting information. What has happened, what I have observed at the elementary, middle, well, basically what I would call the public school level, grades K through 12, is there are outside sources, usually outside the community. Most of the pressure coming from people who don't have children within the school system, but because they control so much of the necessary funding, there's a tremendous amount of pressure on elementary, middle school, and high school teachers to toe the line, to teach the curriculum, which most of them have no input in, no choice of the direction or the focus of that curriculum. They are simply told to present it in lockstep and not complain. I'm very aware that there are public school systems in existence in this country in which the members of the school boards are told they are to always present a united front. They are never to question the direction that the administration is going, because all that does is cost the school district money and create confusion and perhaps give a bad reputation to the system, et cetera. And they are literally told, you are not to speak to the press. You are not to speak to anyone if you have disagreements with the decisions. Basically, the administrators call the shots, and you're to support that. And those administrators quite often are trying to hold on to their jobs because you have, whether it is the state board of education, and again, it all comes back to funding. I have a lot more hope in what is being, or the manner in which things are being taught and what's being taught at the university level. The only problem that I have is by the time kids are 18 years old, they have been so indoctrinated that it's very difficult for them to take on that mantle of challenging what I've always been taught and that sort of thing. So maybe I'm overreacting, but I have a tremendous fear of what's happening, not only in the public school systems, but in most private schools, because they don't have the funding. Most private schools don't have the funding either.
It's worse in some private schools. I mean, so here, I agree and disagree with you. I think I agree with you 100% on the elementary through. And I was just sitting here thinking, I think what's been interesting is I think there's been a big change, and there was something magic about 2020. It seems like, and COVID played a lot in this. And I think something you were laying out is, and it's not because people caught COVID and lost their mind. That was an opportune time to start controlling and censoring and doing that. It was a great. It will be looked at as one of the greatest experiments in human history and how humanity reacted in 50 years ever, because of some of the changes it brought about. But I think one of the things you said, I think, is intriguing, is the conformity. So before you can really start doing indoctrination, you've got to get conformity. And so some of that's what you were describing as well, is to get people to be able to get the teachers and everybody else to be on board with it, with the curriculum and everything else. You had to have the uniformity and conformity from school boards all the way down through the administrators to the teachers. And then what you can start doing is injecting. I mean, when you look at some of the books, and this is not propaganda or anything else, you can see it. I mean, you've had school boards where parents have gone up and started reading the books in front of the school board, and it's full on porn. It's transgender porn. It's absolute insanity, the things they're talking about. And so I think that was part of the mechanism to get, yes, funding and all that. But if you look at, again, my full on conspiracy theory, if you are trying to create an indoctrination program, first you've got to get the conformity. Because if you just start trying to bring those books in and sneaking things into the library and changing the curriculum without the conformity, people are going to say, no, I'm not doing that. You still are going to get some of that. But for your point, teachers need their paychecks, principals need their paychecks. And so it's easier to push some of that once you get the conformity and people aren't willing to speak up. And there is and this is a thing, it happened on social media for a while during COVID. It happened with podcasters. It happens at university levels. It's happening with school administrators. It's the self-censoring, where the fear of losing your job or whatever the case, becoming an outcast and being canceled, then you self-censor. And I think that's why from 2020 through now, and I think some of it's gone backwards a little bit. I think now there's a lot of strife. At least people are more aware of some of it. And I think while kids it was good and bad. I think education took a step backwards for sure during COVID because parents who had jobs were trying to teach their kids and help them at home. I think the good news is the parents got to look into some of the stuff that was going on during that time.
Yeah.
And there was a little bit of pushback. So the public school, I agree with you completely. I think university, and again, I think it got a lot worse in 2020. And if you look across, and again, it's not unique to any one school or one geographic area. It's better or worse in some areas. It's the same thing. It used to be that, it was, hey, you're seeking truth. Mm-hmm. And it was the ability to think freely. That has changed over the last 5 or 6 years in university. You can see it, and it's the same thing. It's the cancellation, it's the self-censoring, it's the kicking out of students, and it's not so much what's being taught in the classroom. I think that's probably consistent. It's really more of look at who is allowed to come in and speak or not. It used to be you could have whatever you want. Somebody come into the university center and speak. Now, the level of outrage, if you bring some conservative person in to talk at all, and I mean, you listen to some of these stories about when Riley Gaines, unbelievable. I forget what school it was. It was one she should have never gone to. She should have known better because it was geographically was probably in one you would say. She got locked into a room.
Berkeley.
It was something like that. I mean, it was a California school, I think. But I mean, she ended up locked in a room with people beating on the door, threatening her. She was in there for hours. University police weren't doing anything. Nobody would do anything because they were scared. They were told they couldn't do anything. I mean, you look at some of the things that happen like that. And so I don't think the curriculum, I think you're right on that. The curriculum and what's being taught, I don't think changed radically. I think the culture at the universities, all the stuff that I think is as important as what's being taught in the classrooms a lot of times, I think a lot of that has changed and become a lot less free. And you're not a free thinker. You're kind of a wrong thinker if you get outside of whatever leaning that school has.
Yeah, I think we can lay some of the blame for that on technology. The fact that somebody can take a snippet of a video of something that someone said, post it, and say, this left-wing commie or this right-wing ultra-orthodox Christian conservative is spreading this on our college campuses. Yeah. Number one, so what?
Right.
I mean, I can remember, and again, I was a child of the 60s, made my way through the Vietnam War and that sort of thing. And even in good old Lubbock, Texas, we had a variety of people that came in and spoke. And quite honestly, if they were left leaning, I don't even know that we used that term back then, but nobody showed up. That was the biggest thing.
The best one, I think that's what used to happen is, the whole tribalism, and again, COVID made it worse because you had more things to divide people. And again, I think there is an intentional divisioning. We've talked about the othering. Right. And I think that happened on the whole left, right, liberal, conservative. You had somebody show up, and if you went and looked at who they were and you didn't want to go, you just didn't go. The court of public opinion let ideas be fleshed out. And you did have discussion that was healthy and all that, and it was allowed to happen. Versus,
there was always a cake party going on somewhere that you could go to.
That's right. Yeah, no matter what or who was putting it on. But I do think the forced conformity on college campuses aren't allowing students to really seek what is true. And you talked about it before with, when somebody's doing a research project, if you start out with knowing how it's all going to end and your thesis is already proved out before you even do any research, that's useless. And that's what it feels like on a lot of college campuses is here's what's true, and there are some truths, gravity, God there. But within that, there's a lot of, especially when you start talking about politics and the way government should work, there's a lot of room for discussion. And that discussion is being squelched.
Right. Well, and I know I'm looking back with, a fondness for the 60s and early 70s, but I do believe that social reform took place primarily under the leadership of college students or college-age students. Yes. It took place on college campuses. Yep. In spite of all of the negative side of some of what went on, there was a true social reform. Now it is a social tribalism that is cropping up on college campuses. And it is now, if you're not a part of our tribe, we don't want you at Harvard.
Well, and the problem is not only will you get run out and you're not allowed to talk, I mean, they're threatening your career in college. Right. You will never get a job. If you show up at this protest or this rally or this thing or with this person speaking, we will ensure that, our network at Harvard, you'll never get a job. Well, that didn't happen. I mean, to your point, that was the free thinking, seeking out truth, test what you've been told, and if it holds up, that's good. That's a healthy thing that, again, I think that is, we're kind of off of the education part, but when we ask what is the point of it, a lot of it is that really being able to think, because again, take out brain surgery and, rocket scientist and some of those things. If you're getting a business degree or liberal arts, any of those, a lot of that is learning how to deal with people and forming relationships and maturing, socially maturing and getting an emotional, IQ versus an academic IQ. That can carry you a long ways. And that really is through thinking and testing and discussing and, not just being part of a tribe.
Right. And it's something you and I are attempting to do through this podcast. Putting you in a situation where you, number one, learn more about context of everything that's happened historically and in the context of the situation that we're in now, and being willing to listen to the other side and glean any truths or certainly any good ideas that might be there, and to be able to do so. That has unfortunately disappeared, and unfortunately it's disappeared on some of our, excuse me, more august campuses and universities across the country.
Yeah. Well, I think Elon, it has in society in general, and we can argue who's the chicken and who's the egg. Is it education that caused it, or are they a product of it? I don't know that they caused all the problems, but they're definitely in lockstep. And I think social media became the same way. The self-censoring, you would get banned, you would get kicked off. If you're on YouTube and you're doing a podcast, you're going to lose your livelihood. If you say these three things, so you can't have what Joe Rogan went through and some of the other ones, he was big enough and Spotify stood by him. But some of the doctors he had on that had all kinds of mRNA patents, whether they're right or not, the fact that he can't have a discussion and that's looked at on guys who had the patents, it's like, man, that's not good at all. And so the censoring that went on, and really Elon's the one that changed that when he bought Twitter. And again, a lot of people don't love it because there is a lot of awful things that people say about people on Twitter. Well, the best way to let some of that play itself out, the court of public opinion will take care of it. If you're an idiot and you're an anti-Semite and you get on there saying stuff, or you're a racist, or you fill in the blank, it'll work. People will see that, and sure, there's dumb people who are going to believe anything they read on Twitter. They'll sort themselves out too. But I'm a pretty absolutist when it comes to free speech. And I think that was a beauty of college campuses and even high school. It wasn't as free, but there was room for some discussion. And I think a lot of that's been taken out. And again, to go all the way back, if we failed and kind of what's the purpose, if the purpose becomes indoctrination, there is no way education is going to be the focus in the students. Right. That's, learning our 3 R's, reading, writing, and arithmetic and beyond. If your focus is on how to get more money and then you're worried about how to lose money, and then you got a puppeteer that's controlling, the money, if you don't do the right things, there is zero chance the outcome is as good as it could be around the fundamentals of education, because it's no longer about that.
Right. Which brings us back. We can go back to one of the questions that we haven't gotten to yet, but I think it's key here is who should be in charge of education. And I'm not talking about a single entity,
Right.
a single individual, a single committee, but is it the local school board? And we're talking about from K all the way through postgraduate work. School board, is it the state? Is it the federal government? Do the teachers have any authority at all? Do we give them any control? How about the parents? I mean, these are all people that are involved in educating our children and our college students and basically shaping the future of our country. And I don't know who's in charge. And I've worked with all of these organizations, including the Department of Education, and I still don't know. They all think they are.
Yeah, I think the wrong people are in charge. And I think my opinion, and just what it is the pyramid's a little bit upside down. I think it's similar to our federal government. If you go back and look at the original intention of the federal government, it was a federation of states. Right. That was very limited responsibility around kind of protecting the nation and doing a handful of things. And then it grew into this beast that it is now. But that implied that the states had all the rights and the federal government was not going to. And again, those guys were really smart, but they also came out of a very tyrannical society that they were trying to create something opposite. Ironically, we're talking about this today, and the king was here today talking to our king or president or whatever people think about him. He's a bad king. I did hear somebody say he's a really bad king because, and he said it, if kings aren't supposed to hang out with people, and they can't get him to quit hanging out with people, and he keeps getting shot at. So, but ironically, in the 250th year, the king made a trip over to have a discussion. But I think the Department of Education and the federal government think they're more involved than they should be, whether they are or not. I like racy charts and diagrams for program management and organizations. We were talking about them at our offsite. So somebody's got to be responsible. Then there's an accountable, and then there's a consulted, and then there's an involved. And when you were going through kind of who's with parents and all these different people, it's kind of like we need to put together a really good racy diagram and reset everybody. And I think the pyramid's upside down. I think if you're going to have a Department of Education, which I agree with you, I think it should be abolished. I think it does no good for anyone. I think it needs to be pushed back to the states. That's something that Trump has battled a lot, and people are like, oh, what about Alabama and Mississippi and these other, number 40 through 49? Well, help them. That's fine. And also take the best state, if it's Minnesota, whoever the number one state is, let them also figure out how to help Alabama, Mississippi, and some of the other lower ones. And I think when you say who caused this problem, I think parents are very accountable and let some of this happen. Sure. And that was some of the notes I made. And this is something I saw from when I was in school, watching Mom and then watching Cassie teach and then watching the girls. When I was in high school, and I graduated from high school in 1992, it was very clear from my mom and dad, if a coach, teacher, principal, anybody said I did something wrong, I was guilty. There was no trial. There was no getting an attorney. I was guilty, and it might as well just ask what my punishment was. And we can have a discussion of whether that was good or bad. That hid some things that probably weren't great either. But that's how it was. And then over time, I listened to Mom and some of the things she dealt with. And then Cassie taught for 5 years from 02 to 07. And she had kids that she caught cheating on computer science projects. And she got letters from parents telling her why they really weren't cheating. It was like a legal, argument that they put forth defending their kids. And so it went from parents, looking after, helping, supporting the education and being very involved, not a negative involvement, but hey, this is our responsibility to make sure our kids get educated, being involved in the school boards, because I do think the local and state school board is where it needs to stop. But ultimately, I think the most responsible person, if you think about who's responsible for the outcome of the kids for the first 18 years of their life, it's the parents. It's not the schools. It's not the federal government. It's not the state government. It's the parent. my mom was unbelievable in advocating for me, and coming out of a school where I graduated with 61 other people. In eighth grade, I took algebra. We were the first class. I think there were 7 of us that ever took algebra in the eighth grade at New Hope High School or at New Hope School. And then we were promised that by the time we got to be seniors, if we stuck with it, we could take calculus. Well, by the time we got there were only 5 of us, and the board said, no, we're not going to hire a teacher and all that for 5 students. Mom argued with the board, and we ended up going to Madison County High School, then Gurley. We didn't have a homeroom. We drove there, went to school first period. And that was super helpful to me when I went to UAH and started out the foundation of my engineering degree. But that wasn't because the school cared about me. It was because my mom did. And I think ultimately in holding teachers and educators accountable, and that doesn't mean defending the kids when they did something stupid. That means make sure you've got credible, people running the schools that are good at what they do, hold them accountable. And if you're going to do tenure, fine, but you got to be able to fire them too to make sure the education is at a standard. And I think the parents got busy. We can go into a whole different discussion of, both parents working gets tough, and then who has the time to really go do that. There's a lot of problems, but ultimately parents got busy and kind of started dropping kids off at school and hoping for the best. And that allowed a lot of the things we were talking about. It's my theory. I'm curious what you think.
Well, I think you're right. I think parents for far too long in the last several decades have abdicated their responsibilities and foisted it upon teachers and school systems and then complained. But talking about advocating for your children, I, up to this point in time, had been heavily involved in education, but I stepped in when my daughter entered the 7th grade, and they're actually in the 6th grade. I'm sorry. There was a growing emphasis on standardized tests, which I think are a fallacy. They serve no purpose other than to categorize children into levels of ability that are false on their very premise. But be that as it may, I made it very clear to the school board, to the principal of her middle school that she was going into, that she would never take a standardized test, period. And that this was not a request. This was me informing them that it wouldn't happen. People can agree or disagree. I say this: she did take one standardized test in language arts when she was in the 8th grade because the school needed a higher score average, and they knew she would
She
do well.
helped.
So
Yeah, that's good.
I permitted that. I think I was on the school board at the time.
That's funny.
But
Well, I think too much emphasis is put on them, and I think what you just said, because I do think there's a place for them. I have no problem with ACT. My oldest daughter, we worked really hard. She worked really hard, and we helped her to get her ACT where it needed to be. She graduated. She's about to graduate from Huntsville High. AP classes, way over a 4.0 on a 4 scale because of all her AP classes, and she struggled with her ACT. She doesn't take standardized tests well.
Yeah.
Both of my daughters started out where they struggle with sounds to the point where, and it's what you said earlier, everybody wants to put somebody in a bin. We had her tested for dyslexia, all kinds of things, because at 5 she couldn't read fluently at a 8th grade level like everybody wanted to happen. And finally, my buddy that's her pediatrician said, Carl, I tell you what, when she's 9, if she's not reading well, we should talk about something. She's fine. She's a kid. We're pushing these kids to do too many things too early. Kaylee had the same problem. Somebody who's now a good friend of ours, Abby, she listens to our podcast, so shout out Abby. She was great with Kaylee. She taught her for 2 years, and she cared deeply about Kaylee and helped her really with her foundations of reading. And both of the girls are very, very sharp students and read well, but we could have easily gone down that pathway of between standardized tests and, hey, can you do this thing and that thing? You get bent out on a different path. If we just let things happen, I don't know how that would have played out. But luckily, we were very involved. And then, again, Claire had really good teachers. Kaylee had Abby, who was great. We're personal friends with her now. But that was some good teachers. But it was also parental involvement. Because if you just let the system happen to your kid, I don't know that you get the outcome you want.
Well, let me see if I can offend everybody within the system here with this. One of the things that I've always held to, because I am very much, as you know, a strong libertarian. Yeah. And am a strong believer in as little government intervention in our lives as possible. There's an old adage that I learned when I was in Cambodia, and it was basically that the national government's authority ends at the provincial, at the line of the province. The provincial authority ends at the line of the via or the village, and the village authority ends at my front door. And I believe that that is true. At the same time, that doesn't necessarily mean, in terms of educational administrators, school boards, the state boards of education, federal government, et cetera, perhaps they all have a particular role to play as long as we redefine that role and it's being productive instead of getting in the way. And this is probably because I was one for so long. I think the centerpiece on all of this has got to be the teacher. Okay. Yeah. We have got to put education back into the hands of the teachers. It is not in the hands of the parents. I'm sorry, but most parents do not know how to teach. They don't understand math. They may not understand politics. They may not understand American history or how to construct a proper sentence. I believe that the parents can step in and advocate for their children, as we've talked about, and particularly as it relates to any of the socio-political, I don't really want to, let's just say education, because we like to call it education, that is going on. If I, as a parent, am not in agreement with that, which goes beyond reading, writing, and arithmetic, basically, I think you've got room, and there is a reason for them to have the authority there. Administrators ought to administrate, period. My sister will shoot me when she hears this, but most administrators were not that great as teachers, or they lost their love for the classroom. And maybe they lost their love for the classroom because of administrators they had to work under. There's, I'm not going to point that at anyone, but, there's the old adage, those who can't do, teach, and those who can't teach teachers.
Yep.
There is a need for proper administration. Yes. School districts are very complex. They report to a lot of different entities, including the press. And
think about something you said earlier around this, Randy, though, and I could not agree more. And I think I agree with the parents. Every parent's not equipped to go, be an educator. I think you need to hold the school system accountable to make sure your kids are getting the outcome you want. But as far as involvement in a lot of other things, go be on the school board if you want to. And there are some people who are qualified and some who are not. But I think could not agree with you more. And this, I'm very biased, and I'll admit that because of my mom and because of Cassie. And you think about how it's going right now. Take curriculum. You mentioned this earlier. And my mom fought this. She was on the, whatever it was called, the curriculum, choose the curriculum committee. Right. And over time, it went from my mom having a lot of say in the textbooks they used, what they were teaching, to her being told what they were going to teach.
Yes.
And that came not from school board, but you started getting standardized curriculum and the Common Core math and all that stuff. No math teachers picked any of that. Surely my mom did. And so I think that's to your point. Again, I think you also have to, because some of it, the teachers didn't care and became absent and allowed other people to do it. First of all, you've got to hire qualified teachers who are passionate about teaching. And that's not easy, but I believe you should probably pay them well and give them good benefits to incentivize people who are capable, because that is a problem. A lot of teachers who are able to teach and are passionate about it get burned out because they don't feel like they're able to do the thing they're passionate about. So you got to get good teachers. But I think the opposite of that is happening. And curriculum, you mentioned that earlier, is one of the best examples of who picks the dang curriculum. It's a very top-down model, and the teachers are just told what they're going to use. They don't even get to have a vote. And it used to be, not that many years ago, the teachers were picking the curriculum and doing evaluations. Mom used to have a whole bookshelf. It seemed like I was younger. It seemed like a 30-foot wall in her classroom with, I don't know how many textbooks on it, because she would get the textbook manufacturers would send her books. They knew she was part of the evaluation group, and she would use them and teach out of them and do different things. And when it was, every 3 years or 4 years or whatever, they got new curriculum, that would all go into what was being decided. But she had a big play in how curriculum was. And now that's not the case. They don't have textbooks anymore. That's a
Well, let me tell
whole
you,
different discussion.
that is a part of the problem. And again, it comes back down to money. I know I've got physician friends who have said that one of the things that bothers them the most and takes up too much of their time is the drug manufacturers reps constantly in their offices, bringing sandwiches, bringing donuts, inviting them for lunch, giving them a weekend all expenses paid to a seminar, that sort of thing. Well, that now has happened in education. There are countless numbers of so-called curriculum development organizations out there who, most of whom are publicly traded on the
Yes.
stock market. They have one overarching job, and that is to return as high a return as they can on the investment of their investors. So there's tremendous pressure and a lot of money, not necessarily going to the teachers, unfortunately, but going to administrators, et cetera, and certainly at least applying pressure. And there's nothing that I saw that was more heartbreaking and caused some teachers, good teachers, to leave the profession when I was involved with the school board. Was you would have teachers that would get a new curriculum, as you said, handed down to them, and they were to go spend a week learning how to use this curriculum and then initiate it. And 3 years later, there is a new curriculum
Yeah.
that they now have to learn and
And
toss.
math didn't change a whole lot over those 3 years.
Right, right. Nate Bergazzi, sometime people can just look this up, has a great bit on Common Core math,
I've heard it. It's
in which he
awesome.
said, that the primary purpose of Common Core math was to take something and make sure that it took at least a full page to solve the equation.
Yeah.
And he says, as you're going through all of this stuff, he said, you do see old math in there. And you say, hey, why don't we just do this? And then we have the answer up here. But that is true of so much of the
I had
curriculum.
that debate with Claire. That was the lineage of how I got out of helping my kids with homework, specifically in math. Was when they came home and started arguing with me. And I don't brag about degrees or anything else, but I do have a minor in math. We were the first class at UH to ever get a minor in math as an engineering class. It was pretty cool. We had to take one more class. We did a petition. It hasn't done anything for me in my life other than it made mom happy, and I've gotten to argue with my daughters. But they start arguing with me, and we're talking like 5th and 6th grade math of how to do these things. And I finally, to Claire, said, "Hey, I hear what you're saying. I promise you, your math teacher in the 6th grade has not got more math background than I do.
Right.
And I'm telling you, I don't care what they say. That's not the best way to do it." And so finally I said, "Call your mom, call your grandmother." And so they called my mom, and she's like, "No, he's right." And I said, "Okay, so now that you listen to her, why don't you start tutoring?" And so I officially retired from tutoring them in math, and it's been great. Everybody loves it. But I think the other thing, and specifically around math, and this is a whole different discussion we could probably do 2 podcasts on, is the textbooks. And maybe I'm because I'm old now, but going to all computer based, because no Huntsville City schools use textbooks. Everything's computers, and I'm not anti-technology. I love technology. I love AI. It's part of what I do every day. Absolutely love it, and there's a place for it. But learning the fundamentals of things before you go use the automated version and all that is very important. And specifically math, because I know that better than anything. And Mom and I've talked. She fought this for a long time, and it's something that when I was still trying to help the girls, they would come say, "Hey, I can't figure out how to solve this problem." They've got a computer with a screen in front of me. How many math problems can you work without a pen and paper or a pencil and paper?
Right.
So that was a fundamental thing. If you came and asked me a problem in math and you don't have a pencil and paper that you've done some stuff on, you need to go do that and then come back. And if you can't do that, at least bring me a pencil and paper so we can talk about it. Because us talking about the computer screen, and that's a whole different discussion of how they're learning and being taught. Sure, that probably works well for English and other things where you're looking at words, but physics, chemistry, a lot of things where you've got to write stuff down, you can't do that with a keyboard. You're just giving them the answer.
Yeah. Well, you just go to AI now and let them know. We'll get into that at another time and
a
the
whole
impact
different
of technology.
Yeah.
Let me ask you this. Do you think that corporate America should have a stronger voice in what we're doing educationally? And I'm talking from the ground up, not just college.
Yeah.
And I say that because, and you're aware of this, a couple of decades ago, you had some of the major technology companies in the world telling very bright high school students, don't waste your time and money in college. Come and pass our test, as a part of our application. If you score high enough, we will teach you everything you need to know about our product, how to develop it. This wasn't all just in technology, but
Yeah.
we'll teach you how we want it done, how we're applying it here, and you'll make 3 times what you'll ever make with getting that degree in IT in college.
Elon's doing it right now. Elon's made the argument, and again, he's a lot smarter than I am. And they're doing it in some third world countries. He's part of a group that's doing it, where they're using AI to teach the equivalent of a whole college degree in a very small amount of time. And it's very interactive, but there are other ways, and there's goodness in technology. But I think that's where, and again, there's another podcast topic of what's going to be the future of universities. I'd love to do that one. We could spend a lot of time
Yeah.
on
No,
what
there's
that
room for
is.
that.
I think
Absolutely.
there's a problem. I did it when we were in manufacturing, because when you talk about building printed circuit board assemblies and all the technology that goes into that, well, a lot of that moved in the late 90s to Mexico, then it moved to China. But in the United States, you had very few people who understood how to run surface mount machines to place the components on printed circuit board assemblies, all the full, how to maintain the equipment, how to do different forms of soldering. All that technology moved, and a lot of people retired. And so you had a whole gap in skill set. So that's what we did. And we had a lot of automation to build glucose meters and other things. And we really would interview on, do you have the aptitude to learn? Are you willing to show up every day and work hard? And I was just meeting Kids to Love K-Tech. They do some pretty cool things here in town with mechatronics certifications and soldering. And I just told that class the other day, if you just show up every day, you're in the top 50%. You show up and work hard, you're top 75% of all employees. Show up, work hard, have a good attitude, you're the top 90% of everybody. And especially if you can get some kind of certification or something like that. But a lot of people, Mazda, Toyota here in Huntsville, a lot of these big companies, specifically in the trades and the manufacturing, if you will show up and you show you've got an aptitude, they'll invest in you because they're going to train you. And I think you're going to see the same thing start happening in other areas. Lawyers is a whole different discussion about what AI is going to do with that. But I think because of the cost of college education, student loans, all these things, it's forcing people to rethink what's going on. And I think that whole thing that Apple and others did that you're mentioning 20 years ago, I think that's going to become more of a thing. And
Even
people are
if
going to
it's
teach
not,
you how to do their job.
even if the education is not going to take place through the corporate infrastructure, I definitely believe either it will or there will be a much stronger collaboration
Yep.
between corporate America
Yes.
and the universities. And universities, especially if you and I get rid of the Department of Education and all of its funding, federal
Yeah.
funding, are going to be looking for that. And it's
Yes.
probably a better model to do it that way. And if they don't, then corporate America will do what it needs
Yes.
to get the people it needs, to train them, and to get the production that it needs.
Well, and that's one of the things when Elon was talking about the AI college degree, basically, he talked about what you and I were talking about earlier. And the piece he admitted, learning the stuff, he said, I can do it in a much quicker amount of time, more efficiently, better retention. The piece you miss is the social, moving, advancing, maturing socially and advancing and learning all that. That
Learning to
piece.
collaborate,
And he talked about that. You
learning to
need that
properly
piece.
communicate.
So you got to
Yeah, I
figure out
mean,
how to do that part.
one of the things I can tell you right now, Elon Musk does not know how to communicate,
No, absolutely not. And he knows that.
except the people that have his level of
That's right.
genius, and there aren't very many of them.
No.
It's interesting because there has been a part of me that has seen us heading down this path. Because at the end of the day, when I get out of college, I need a job. I need someone to pay me to take on a task that I have been prepared for. So at the end of the day, those people who are offering their jobs, they are going to have a lot of say, whether it is direct or whether it's indirect, in what colleges are, with the purpose of the educational system when you get out of high school, maybe even prior to then. But it's interesting that there's a part of me that has said maybe colleges should be for attorneys, maybe accountants, maybe engineers, maybe chemists and physicists, this
Right.
sort of thing. And then everything else should be basically given over to a collaborative effort or directly to corporate America to bring in, to bring up the types of employees that they need. But at the same time, I am a huge believer in liberal education.
Yeah, I am too.
And I believe that if we handle liberal education like it was intended to when the University of Pennsylvania and Harvard and Yale and Princeton were established,
Yes.
we can bring brilliance out of that. It's interesting that more and more colleges are becoming more and more specialized for the
Yes.
very reasons you and I are talking here. And it's an education that is directed to very specific applications.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the downside to that is I go into this as some sort of an IT program specializing in AI when I'm a freshman. And by the time I hit the end of my junior year, the technology has changed and the demand has changed. So I'm not sure that that's always the best answer. But
Well, so you used a
one of the
word
things
earlier
that
that
I
I think
like,
is important is the collaboration. And so
Mhm.
this is something I saw when we were working in hypersonics, and I've seen it across the board, but it was really evident there. We hired a lot of junior engineers who were recent graduates, and it was almost 2 years a lot of times before we got them ready to really do the stuff we needed. And they're coming out of really good schools with good engineering degrees, and they weren't ready for the workforce. And again, that's back to the disconnect of the academia for the sake of academia, and who's setting the requirements of what's the
right,
purpose of education. Because you hit it earlier, historically, and we can talk about the new part of it, but even the liberal arts piece, that's really to help you get a job, because you don't necessarily want to hire everybody that communicates and acts like Elon. Some of that is you want a mature person has dealt with some conflict and everything through school and matured. But if the point, because the point of education used to be to create a career. And so if you're going to create a career, you need somebody to hire you, or you go start your own thing, but that's not what everybody's going to do. But you need, who's defining that? And so I do think there's got to be, and it's one thing I've said about Huntsville. One of the unique things about Huntsville, and we win best place to live and work and all this stuff, I wish it would stop. Take a break. I'm good with it, but let's take a 3-year pause to keep people from moving here so frequently. But I've said this about public education, because in Huntsville, I don't know the nation, but I know specifically in Huntsville, during COVID, the private schools enrollment went through the roof. Everybody was leaving public schools, going to private schools. Well, now a lot of kids are leaving private schools, going back to public schools. And a big push as well is homeschooling, which, that's a different discussion. That's a whole nother podcast probably.
right,
And it's not homeschooling like it was when you and I were doing it. It's more,
right,
it's more of different. It's a pseudo private slash, because they don't have one person teaching everything at your house. It's a different
right.
thing with these programs they've got. But the movement's been interesting. But I have contended, and this goes back to kind of 2020, because a lot of this stuff shifted, and it caused a lot of that movement, that industry in Huntsville would demand of the local school board, of the city administration, the county administration, that the public education in North Alabama remains at a high level. Because if not, that's one of the selling points of Huntsville, is a really good, and I'm part of the Committee of 100, which that is one of our tenets, is high quality public education. We want business-minded leaders, economic development and growth, and high quality public education. Because without that high quality public education to recruit people to move to Huntsville, and that's not just families to do the work of the companies, but that's to get companies to move here. They have to know that they have a talent base that they can pull from, and not just a university, but K through 12 and trade schools and all that. So I do think in some areas the industry will demand it, and that has happened in Huntsville. Industry has driven a lot of the quality of the education in Huntsville as to what it is, because they need the talent and they need to be able to recruit families to move here so they can hire people. So I
Right.
think that collaboration, the key word I think is collaboration, because the industry without education is a problem. And again, we can define what education is, and that's a different podcast, because AI is going to change what that even needs to look like. but it still needs to exist. So industry without education is not as efficient, and education, the system without industry grounding what it is, you're not creating careers for anybody. So I think that's a
Right.
huge, that you used the word collaboration earlier. I think there's got to be a collaboration between a number of people to get education back on track to producing careers and people who are ready for the workforce in whatever that is. And there's a bunch of off ramps, whether it's tech school or
Right.
college or whatever. Everybody doesn't need to go to college. That's a waste for a lot of people. You're building more buildings so you can get out and do something completely different than what you're doing. But I think, and I think it's interesting when you were saying that, I think one key word is collaboration at all levels. Parents to teachers, teachers and administrators to industry. I think all that, there's got to be a resetting, and that collaboration needs to lead to what is the expectation and what is our outcome that we're hoping for.
Let me ask you this. I'm skipping down to, because we're not going to get all this covered in this
Yeah.
podcast. We'll pick it up next week.
Yep.
But do you think that what we're talking about here has the traditional model of education run its course? Do you think we can go back to the kind of educational model I had in the 1950s and 60s when I was coming through elementary and middle school?
I don't even think we can go back to the model. And again, my daughters have been very fortunate. They've gone to Huntsville Public Schools. They're both going to graduate. Well, one's about to. I'm pretty sure of that one. The second one, I think, is going to graduate from Huntsville High. Chances are good. I don't think in 5 years we can go back to what they have right now because it's changing pretty quickly. We definitely can't go back to what I had. We definitely can't go back to what you had. I think similar to the college football playoffs and conferences, once the genie comes out of the bottle, putting it back in is a challenge. And I think the world has changed. And I think that's part of what we started talking about in the beginning is, are we behind or not? Well, I think people caught up and they were innovative and figured out. I mean, you look at a lot of foreign countries, they do look at it and there are pathways. I mean, I know Canada, a lot of Europe, South America, across the board, most places I've traveled, you start out in kindergarten and everybody kind of starts on a level playing field. And then as you work your way through, you start getting put into different tracks based on what you're interested in, what your aptitude is, and everybody can't be a brain surgeon. And you start bending out toward what's your career path going to be, and you're preparing for something. I think that's what we've got to, if we redesigned it, it's going to have to be something like that, especially with what's going on with technology, because technology is changing what careers are going to be.
Well, let me throw something out there in defense of not only our country, but our approach to education. I do believe, if you believe in scores, which I don't always, it appears we have fallen behind other countries, China in particular, in math and that sort of thing. I will tell you that my observations are still that other countries, let's take China, for example, whom we are most often compared to. They are very good at reverse engineering and replicating and doing things more cheaply. Although I will tell you, living in a country now where 70% of our goods come from China, quality is still horrible, almost across the board.
Yeah.
There is very little innovation coming out of India, coming out of China. There's never been any in Russia. Very little coming out of Europe. They all come to the United States to get their education and to learn, and then they take it back and attempt to replicate it in their own countries. I want to give you something to just give you a homework.
Let me give you one thing on that real quick, because I've had this exact debate with a guy, a real good friend of mine. He's bilingual, spent a lot of time in Germany. He worked for Daimler. He was part of the McLaren F1 team. He's done a lot of really cool things. Married a German lady, so he's bilingual. One of the smartest guys I know, and he's able to brief at an executive level, and he can jump in and do hardware and software design. He's a very, very unique guy. But he was in this mode where he thought he needed to go to Europe and move to Germany to be able to be free to do the innovation and design of the stuff he wanted to do in the medical field. And I said, I completely disagree with you. And even if, I don't, because a lot of it, they're being educated, take China out of the mix because they are coming here and Russia specifically, getting our education and going back. But look at a lot of Europe. They are getting their education in Europe, even other places, but Europe specifically. But name me one revolutionary thing. And I'm not talking about a small thing. I'm talking not a little mousetrap, but like electricity, cars, planes, and yeah, cars were not invented here, but the ones that were used now were airplanes, electricity. Go down to the big ones, telephones. Al Gore's from here. You invented the internet, which has changed things. So, this is a different podcast, but it's not the quality of the education that we have here. It's not that Americans are smarter, because honestly, who isn't American? We all came from somewhere else to come here. Um, it's the system of reward for innovation. Why is Elon here? Why does he not live in Germany or China or wherever?
South
Because
Africa.
you can be a billionaire here. If you invent something really cool, and we may not long if we start figuring out how to do wealth taxes and tax people on, their holdings and companies and different things, that may change that. But up until this point and today, you're rewarded for innovation. You're
Hey, that's
not.
just a one-time that's just a one-time tax in California now.
Yeah, and then and they don't give it back to you when it goes down, and when it goes up again, they'll do it again. So it's going to be awesome. But the system we have here, and again, I don't want people to think we're completely beating up on the U.S. Our educational system needs work, but the form of government and other things we have around capitalism, that could be a different podcast. It does incentivize, through its good and bad, innovation. You do not have revolutionary innovation. You have iteration in other places. Japan does iteration because they're kind of scared of innovation. They just like to get a little bit better. That's their culture. China likes to take what you had, steal that. They're doing it with AI right now. It's unbelievable. I heard a story the other day. They're using several of their, whatever it is, ocean, whatever, AI companies to just pound the heck out of our AI companies, just scraping data to reverse engineer. But part of the problem with that is it's without some of the safety. So the guardrails are coming off when they're doing that. So yeah, a lot of countries are stealing the things we innovate, but the innovation happens here. I think there is a risk, though, if we don't fix it, because what you don't see is a lot of our kids going to other countries to get educated to come back here. So
Right.
if we don't fix our educational system, the innovation will die.
Right. No,
Because where do you go
I
to get that? It'll either die, or you're going to have a bunch of people that aren't from here, which is fine too, that are doing the innovation. But education plays a role in that. And a whole different podcast we could do is why in the world we innovate anyway. If you were an alien, I think this is funny. Rogan talks about it a lot, and I never had thought about it. If you're an alien watching us like an ant farm, man, it would be intriguing. It's like, why do we do what we do? Everything we're talking about, careers and all this stuff, why? Well, so we can make a faster phone, to have a different car. We're the only species on Earth that uses so much of our energy to make these new things and widgets to build and form things. It's like ants don't do that. They're eating. No other animal does, but we're kind of
right.
intriguing.
I've got a homework assignment for anybody that might listen to this, as well as yourself. If you're not familiar, I don't think I've mentioned this college to you before. There is a college called St. John's College, not St. John's University, St. John's College. I believe the main campus is in Baltimore. They also have a campus in Santa Fe, New Mexico. It is a liberal arts college. I do not believe, I haven't looked into them lately, but I don't believe they offer any kind of graduate courses. Their entire curriculum is reading and writing and making presentations. That's it. They learn geometry by reading Pythagoras. They read the U.S. Constitution. They take the great written words throughout history, and they read. And so, what do they do in class? They read and they write. They don't take tests, but they make presentations of what they have learned and this sort of thing. They come out with a degree that is in liberal arts. Mm-hmm. It's not a degree in math. It's not a degree in French literature. It's a degree in liberal arts. And a lot of people over the years, especially in the last 3 or 4 decades, have made fun of liberal arts majors. A lot of colleges and universities have dropped that major. They said, well, it's pointless because you can't do anything with it. These students are among the most in demand among law schools, medical schools. There are a lot of these students that are getting into medical. Why? Because they know how to think. They know how to collaborate. They know how to communicate. properly. And again, even in medical school, guess what they're going to tell you? I don't care how much biology and physiology you had. That's the very basis. We're going to show you how to do this stuff. Same thing with law. I have a number of friends who are attorneys and said, you know what? Everything that I learned in law school kind of gave me the vocabulary necessary to learn what I needed to learn when I was appearing before the bar
Yep.
in cases. And so it's interesting that you do have at least one example of a college out there that has gone all the way back and said, we're not going to specialize. We're going to specialize in the liberal arts. And Charlie Munger, whose name you may recognize as being the Wizard of Omaha's best buddy.
Yeah.
And Charlie is brilliant, and he is one of those that has espoused all of his educational and professional career that you cannot beat a liberal arts education. So and it may be this is one of the things that does set us apart, at least a little bit, from China and India and Russia and North Korea and Japan from an educational standpoint. So I don't know. I
think that's a really important point, Randy. And we were talking about earlier is maybe doctors and so. So I think maybe that's a problem because I do agree 100%. I've said this a lot. If you, my opinion of what did I learn from kindergarten through 12th grade, and then, my years, it took me a little longer than 4 years to get my engineering degree. The average was right at 5 years, and I made it in about 5.5. What did I learn? Even when I was an engineer for a few years before I started doing it, but surely today it has nothing to do. I don't use any of my engineering degree to do anything I do on a day-to-day basis. But I think the underpinning of education in general, and I think it starts in kindergarten, and I think it's consistent through whatever level of education you get, is learning how to learn. The stuff is going to change. To your point earlier, if you're getting some kind of IT degree or some certification, the stuff is going to change. But learning how to learn, learning how to research, learning how to stretch your brain, and your brain's a muscle. Teaching your brain. I mean, there's a reason reading, people who read a lot are smarter. It's not just because you're retaining information. It is you're exposed to more words, your vocabulary expands, but learning how to learn, if you really look at the important part, and I think that's where we've got to be careful because it would be easy with AI and other technology to say, yeah, we don't need liberal arts. But I think there's studies that are already showing people who use ChatGPT all the time are getting dumber.
Right.
Because you don't have to think. So learning how to, exercising your thinking muscle and learning how to learn, I think you're 100% spot on. If we lose that as one of the tenets of why we do education, I think we've got a major issue. Right. Think about, Elon is a good example. He's got a physics and an economics degree. He's the chief engineer for SpaceX. Nothing he learned, even his physics, didn't necessarily get him there.
Right.
He joked. He went and read books on how to design rockets because he couldn't hire anybody else to be a chief engineer when he started SpaceX. And so what does he have? It started as a small child. He started developing code and other things because he was weird and socially awkward and didn't like hanging out with people. But he read constantly. He learned how to learn. And so how has he done the things he's done? He didn't learn any of that stuff when he was in physics or economics school. It's learning how to learn. And I think you see that with Michael Dell. Just donated $1 billion to the University of Texas to do AI medical research. Super cool. He didn't graduate from college. Got on a list of these guys that Mark Cuban, a lot of Steve Jobs, some of the best innovators of our time didn't learn their craft in college somewhere. They learned how to learn, and then there's the saying, I'll screw it up, but an education will earn you a living. A self-education will earn you a fortune. And that, the more you keep learning and advance your craft, it's better than any education. But I think I think through our discussions, and when we finally get to advocate for how to fix education, I don't think that can, but I do think the liberal arts schools are looked down upon sometimes and poo-pooed because what are you going to go do with that degree? Well, I think you can do a lot.
Right. Well, and unfortunately, too many of the liberal arts colleges have gone down the rabbit hole of supporting a particular agenda.
Yes.
and that has hurt their credibility.
And that's no
But if you
longer
go
a true
back
liberal arts
to a
degree.
basic, if you go
That's
back to a
been, yeah.
basic liberal arts education as espoused in the early days of our country,
Yeah.
Benjamin Franklin, for example, and
Yes.
those guys, it has tremendous value. One other thing that it's certainly an oversimplification, but you may have heard of the book that came out a couple of decades ago. All I really needed to learn, I learned in kindergarten.
Yes.
But there's a lot of truths in that. Now, again, that's more how to communicate, how to collaborate, how to be nice to people, these sorts of things. Still a lot of truth there, but anyway, I just wanted to throw that out about liberal arts. Not that everybody
That's
should
good.
go out now and try to get a liberal arts degree, but that method of education certainly has value.
Well, you
We
mentioned Benjamin Franklin. So you look at how a lot of the early innovators and founders of a lot of technologies, they didn't go to some formal university to learn their craft.
right.
It was a
Right.
self-education. It was through reading. I mean, it was a classical liberal arts education,
Right.
and learning how to
Right.
learn and being curious and continuing to push. That's how they got there. Some of the best thinkers in
Right.
the world ever in history.
And I don't want us to lose that. I think one of the questions is, does some of that need to take place in kindergarten,
Yeah.
at the elementary level, at the middle school level?
Yeah.
Instead of, we're already telling kids, it happened when I was on school board in Nebraska. We devised this wonderful new program where, as a freshman, you had to decide what career path you're going to follow. And then we started directing you into very specific classes that would lead you down the path of that, and which was, I look back on it now, sorry, my friends in Nebraska, but it's asinine.
Yeah.
And I think they have moved away from that particular model. But you know what? It was the hot thing at the time. So somebody came in and sold us a bill of goods. But, we've kind of run out of time tonight, but we've got several things that we didn't even touch on, like how do we deal with religion in our schools? Or should we?
Yeah.
Okay. Are we asking our teachers and our schools to take on responsibilities that should not be theirs? But they should belong to the parents or maybe to other socio-political organizations outside of education. What's the best way to fund education? Because I think we're failing at that. We certainly have created the haves and the have-nots with the methodologies that we're using right now. We've touched on it, but we haven't gone into it. Is the role that technology is playing, the role that we know it's going to play, and how do we put guardrails around that, or should we? I don't know. But these are some things that I think we still need to take a look at. Maybe next week, and we'll see if we get through it all next week. If we don't, we'll take a third week.
No, good stuff, and really good discussion. And you've intrigued me with this liberal arts thing, because as I sit here and think about it, that may be one of the most important. That may be the thing that education, especially as you get higher education, that may be the only role we need. Everything else is taught at companies and other things, but it's been something that has been, again, as I sit here and think about some of the greatest thinkers in the world ever in history, they have a common thread with a lot of that. And I do think it's something that's probably been minimized now. And there's a lot to be learned there. So it's.
Well, I can't remember the title of the book, and I'll have it for next week, but there is a book out there that, again, was recommended by Charlie Munger, and it has to do with the interrelationships between all areas of, mental and social development. What it says in there basically is you will understand chemistry much better if you also understand the development of literature.
Right.
If you understand the development of economics, how economics ties into biology. And these are things that unfortunately we have become, and maybe we're getting out of it. We've become so specialized and so highly focused on this career with these responsibilities, with this growth pattern, career pattern. And then again, because things are changing so rapidly.
So I got a question for us to ponder. Do you think this, and I go back to, I'm going backwards in episodes now, and when we talk about decorum, which, we could spend a whole lot of time talking about our president who keeps getting shot at or tried or whatever. And the decorum. I heard Megyn Kelly on the way home. She used the word decorum, and I was listening to Jimmy Kimmel and what he said and lack of decorum. I'm like, I should send Megan our podcast. She would like that. But I wonder if, we talked about on one of those podcasts the fact that we've got a lot of attorneys that are in Congress and Senate, and those are very specialized professions that are focused on one thing. And you look back at some of the decorum and some of the cooperation in the government, that was at a time where there were true liberal arts schools, and a lot of politicians went through those pathways. I wonder, if some of the division and tribalism and all that and the intellectual laziness and the othering of people is easier to do because you don't have people that are as well-rounded and well-read, so that they have the ability to learn and critically think for themselves. I wonder if that is partly because we've diminished the role of the liberal arts in educating in a diverse manner to really understand the world. That might be a key to a whole different problem.
I completely agree with you, and it's something that I think deserves a deeper dive. You used a term that has become a buzzword over the last decade or so, and has been totally misused: the idea of critical thinking.
Yeah.
Critical thinking cannot exist if it's not tied to a broad liberal arts background.
Yeah.
It just can't be.
You can't look. Critical thinking is not one perspective on a thing. You have to look at it
exactly
holistically.
Right. And so, that's, that's a whole other path to be thinking about. And I had not thought about it in those terms either, but the impact that maybe the lack of that broad liberal.
It even leads to tribalism. If you think about it, if at a basic level, if we're training everybody through education to be doctors, lawyers, engineers, go down the list, you've already made a tribalistic nation because you've become specialized in that. So by nature, you've got one perspective on everything.
Right. And basically, the only thing that's important out there is how does that impact my life and my profession?
That's right.
And my beliefs and that sort of thing. So, well,
listen, really good. We may end up parlaying this, and we'll circle back and figure out how to solve world peace. Everybody gets a liberal arts degree, and there will be peace forever.
Oh, we're only that simple. Well, listen, this has been great. I've enjoyed it. And hey, man, I'm looking forward to next week.
Yes, sir.
Hey, you have a good week.
You as well.